Chapter 7, Management and Discipline. As far as I'm concerned, this is probably the most important chapter in the book that is going to present the major issues for you. You can learn the content, but if you can't manage your students, if you can't discipline them or know how to discipline your students, then the students will not be able to learn, and you're going to get very frustrated and stressed. So in this chapter, we talk about effective class management skills that's going to improve your productivity of giving instructions. So there's two major parts as far as for dealing with behaviors. One part is you're going to have to modify or maintain the acceptable behavior that you want the students to exhibit. And the second part is how are you going to approach the students or handle the situation when you need to decrease the unacceptable behavior. So we're going to talk about timeouts, reprimands, privileges, all kinds of stuff. So management and discipline, a very important chapter in this book. Coordinating management and discipline. If you want to be a successful teacher, then you have to be able to effectively manage your class. When you are observing teachers, notice the little things. How do they get their students in line to go out for recess? How do they get them to orderly get their book sacks if they're not right at their desk? In PE, how do we get them into the actual formations? How do we move from one formation to the next? You have to be able to manage your students. So notice, here they're saying classroom management has more of an influence on the student learning than the actual home environment in which they live in, cognition, all the things that they're learning and processing and terminology and all the learning, and policies. Classroom management is more influential on the students' learning. So, the importance of classroom management cannot be ignored and should be the foundation of your quality teaching. If you want to be an effective teacher, we have to make three assumptions. Number one, that teaching is a profession, that people regard teachers just as important as carpenters, bankers, lawyers, judges, and such. Number two, the second assumption, that students are in school to learn. Are they in school to learn? Most of them are, but some students, unfortunately, the parents have them there as a babysitting, and you have them from 8 to 3, it's your problem. But if we want to be an effective teacher, we have to believe the students are there to learn. Then the third assumption is that our challenge is to promote learning. That is our challenge. This is our responsibility in order to teach these students who accept instruction and those who do not. There's some students who will not accept instruction, so it's our challenge to teach them all. And if we want to be a successful teacher, we have to teach all of the students. That is your challenge. To be effective with management, to be effective with discipline, it takes a coordinated approach. What is our purpose? What you need to understand is managing the student behavior, it's not easy. It is a challenge. What is the most basic reason for management and discipline? It's to help those children learn effectively without infringing on other children's rights. So what is the difference between the two? What is management? What is management defined as, which I want you to know? Management is organizing and controlling the affairs of the class. For instance, how the students are organized. How do you start and stop the class? In the classroom or in the gym or in the playground? How are they grouped? How are you arranging them during class? This is management, organizing and controlling the affairs of a class. Discipline, on the other hand, I want you to know, is defined as modifying student behavior when it is unacceptable. Modifying student behavior when it is unacceptable. When things do not go smoothly and some students decide not to follow your management requests, these behaviors must be addressed. And I'll be honest with you, when I first started teaching, and it took many years, there was always some incident that would pop up, and I didn't know how to handle it in the classroom or in the gym. And that's where you might consult a colleague that you respect and you admire, and you feel like that teacher handles herself or himself very respectful with the students. You know what to do. You're not going to know what to do on every situation. But this is part of learning. That's just life. That's the way it is. It's going to take you 3 to 5 years to feel comfortable that you fairly know what you're doing with the teaching and the contents, the routines, the management, and the discipline. As a beginning teacher, it's going to take you about 3 to 5 years. So when we're working with children in any environment, you have to expect discipline problems. I have found for myself, when I expected no discipline problems, that's when I'd get upset when there was discipline problems. I would get aggravated. I'd get stressed. So I learned to expect discipline problems, and then when they didn't happen, yay, life is good. Successful teachers have strategies and skills to address these issues in an appropriate and productive manner. And that's what I like about this chapter. They're giving you all kinds of helpful tips and hints and strategies on how to manage unruly children, children who are not following your instructions. How do you deal with that? This whole chapter is about these 6 steps. This is what the whole chapter is about. We're going to go into great detail about how to use proper teaching behaviors, defining class rules and procedures and consequences, efficient management skills, teaching acceptable student behavior, or how are you going to use behavior management to increase acceptable behavior and decrease unacceptable behavior. This is what the whole chapter 7 is about, these 6 steps. Part 1, using proper teaching behaviors. I want you to know, in a well-managed class, the teacher and the students assume dual responsibility for learning. Sometimes, the kids are just there physically, but they don't want to learn. Sometimes the teacher is there physically and having a bad day and doesn't want to teach. We have to meet each other halfway. So, there are going to be behavior issues that may be a result of teaching behaviors and are not always derived from unacceptable choices by the student. You may have given unclear instructions. So take a quick look at yourself as a teacher. If you put some time into thinking about what you are going to teach and how you are going to teach, this is what will make you be more successful. If you can prevent problems before they occur, I repeat, if you can prevent problems before they occur, less time is spent dealing with those deviant behaviors. Now, I understand you can't predict everything. I understand that. But if it's happened in previous years, you can anticipate and approach it at a different angle, or say it in a different way, or do something differently. Your behavior influences those students. How the students learn and behave reflects your personality. So recognize your own personal habits and attitudes that affect students in a negative manner. You might record yourself and see, do you hustle? Are you polite? Are you drinking water instead of Coke on your desk when you're teaching nutrition? So you do want to model the acceptable behavior that you want your students to do. Remember, your actions speak louder than your words. So we have some communication styles we need to go over here. We want to develop an assertive communication style, but let's talk about the passive and aggressive communicator before we talk about the assertive communicator. The passive communicator avoids becoming upset at the students and hopes that to make all the children happy, which is not possible, by the way. Many passive teachers want to be perfect so that everybody will like them and that their students will behave perfectly. There's no such thing as the students behaving perfectly. But anyway, passive teachers often relinquish their power to the students, particularly to the least cooperative students. They also ignore unacceptable behavior. They don't deal with it, they ignore it and hope it will disappear. But the problem is ignoring it seldom causes the behavior to disappear. Rather, it becomes worse. So the passive teacher often says things but never follows through with them. For instance, if you say, if you do that one more time, I'm going to call your parents. If they do it one more time, you have to call their parents because you said it. That's like just being a parent at home as well. The teacher in the classroom, if you say something, if you're going to kick them out of class, you're going to send them to the principal if they do it one more time, you have to follow through with it. If you don't, then they know that your words are meaningless. You're not going to do it. So they're going to continue to do it. Let's see what else. So adopting, if somebody has a passive style of communication, it can result in frustration and lashing out at the students when they don't do what they're supposed to do, when they're off task. The passive teacher becomes upset and angry because he or she typically lets the behavior slide and slide and slide until the teacher can't take it anymore. Then the anger subsides and the passive teacher wants to make up, and guess what? The cycle starts all over again, letting the students do what they want to do and trying to be liked. So this cycle is frequently repeated. This is the passive communicator. An aggressive communicator is just the opposite. They want to intimidate the students by coming on strong. A common trait for an aggressive communicator is using the word you, Y-O-U, which is not good. Keeping students feeling defensive and attacked is what's going to happen if you use the you, okay? You are always in trouble. You are always talking, okay? They're going to become very defensive. An aggressive teacher often uses the words always and never. These are labeling words that make students believe they are bad. So the words can generalize and label, that do generalize and label, they create problems and often result in alienation rather than respect for the teacher. The aggressive teacher often sees students as personally attacking her or him, and they focus on labeling and putting down the students rather than dealing with the behavior. We always want to deal with the behavior. So you and I, we want to be an assertive communicator. We're not going to beg, plead, or threaten. We express our feelings and expectations straightforwardly. We're not afraid to say what we want and do not worry about what others think of us. An assertive teacher wants what is best for the students and does not worry about what they think. They come across to students as a no-nonsense approach that needs to be followed. The approach is clear, direct, and concrete. For example, an assertive communicator might say, "It upsets me when you talk while I am talking, So that's about my feelings, and it makes it clear what is unacceptable. An assertive communicator emphasizes clarity without anger. One of the best teachers I've known never raised her voice. Never raised her voice. And she was always given the, and I quote, challenging students. So one way to make your messages more assertive is to use the I instead of the you. Talking about your own feelings. For example, when you're playing with equipment while I am talking, it bothers me and makes me forget what I planned on saying. Please leave your equipment alone. We would say what? Put your equipment in home position. So this example identifies the disrupting or annoying behavior, how you feel, and it directs the student to behave properly. A lot of info here that is not on the test, but it is so valuable for you as a teacher to try and be an assertive teacher. In order to have an effective management approach, you need to understand and plan for how you will behave when disciplining your students. Serious misbehaviors can cause some teachers to become angry and then feel threatened, or others to behave in a tyrant. I want you to know these four ideas, these 4 points for a personal behavior plan. Number one, if a student is being disruptive, you have to maintain your composure. If you lose it, your students lose respect for you and believe you are an ineffective teacher, and they have you where they want you. They got you mad. Number two, acknowledge your feelings when students' misbehavior occurs. Are you angry? Do you feel threatened? Do you feel challenged? Are you fearful? Recognize that. Number three, design a plan for yourself when such feelings occur. For instance, provide positive feedback to a nearby student immediately or take a deep breath. I would definitely take 3 deep breaths, not just 1, but 3, if someone has really made my blood boil. Number 4, know the options you have for dealing with the deviant behavior. So what are our options? Talking with the students is best done after class. If you need just a little bit more than a few seconds to talk to them. Talking to them in front of the class, no. Talking to them when he's in or she's in a group, no. Tell the student, I will speak to you after class, assuming the behavior is not disruptive to the class. So the 4 key points here: maintain your composure, acknowledge your feelings, design a plan, and what are your options. I can't say enough of this, that this is very important on how you handle these types of situations when you have to discipline a student. And these are effective also when you have to discipline your children, if you have children at home, or your nieces and nephews, or you babysit. You want to be a leader and not their friend. Those students want a teacher who is knowledgeable and personable and who is a leader that's going to lead them and guide them. They have their friends. They're not looking for a new friend. Especially if you graduate from college and you're 22, 23, and you're teaching upper elementary. No, you don't want to be their friends. I want you to know that most students feel uncomfortable if they think you are trying to be one of them. So, we do not try to be a part of their personal discussions. We do not ask them questions when they're talking about what happened over the weekend or what happened at home or so forth. No. In fact, we cut it to a drip. We ask them to stop. You can still be friendly and caring as long as you do it in a professional manner. So, acknowledge that the student input is important, but ultimately your responsibility is to lead the class to acceptable objectives. And what are your objectives for that day? We want to communicate high standards and understand the reasons for misbehavior. If you expect your students to perform at high levels, most of the students will strive to do so. What helps you as a teacher is understanding the reasons for the misbehavior, and that will help you to anticipate problems and possibly prevent them. That is your goal, to manage them in a way to prevent problems. So we want to give instructions, do the activity, then stop and clarify the instructions and repeat the activity if some are not performing it correctly. That's the mark of a good teacher who recognizes that most of the students or class is doing it wrong. So it's not that you're a bad teacher. You're just going to have, a good teacher is going to stop them and explain again. Maybe you forgot a demonstration. Maybe you didn't clarify something because of what you're seeing with the students that they're not doing or should be doing. So you're going to reinforce that when you clarify your instructions. On the previous slide, I talked a little bit about understanding the reasons for misbehavior. On page 129, they list some good reasons why students might misbehave, and I should have discussed it then, but they're so important I feel like I need to discuss them now. One of them, the student may be testing you as a teacher. They may be trying you to see how you're going to handle the situation. Number two, the student might have some type of learning disability that's causing their behavior problem. Number three, the student might be looking for reinforcement, might be looking for attention. They may not be getting it at home, and so they want it from you. Number four, the student may have low self-esteem, which causes them to misbehave because they want to be the center of attention. Number five, the student may not understand the directions, and I said that earlier, and you may need to clarify the instructions, so I want you to know that. Excuse me. If the student doesn't understand the directions, you need to stop and clarify. Number six, the student may be bored and unchallenged. I've had that in the classroom where when I taught math, this one child, he was bored. So he started piddling, doodling, and it festered and festered. The student might be bored and unchallenged. Number seven, performing the activities may result in continuous failure. This student knows they cannot jump rope. So why should they do it? They don't want to be a failure. Number eight, the parents may deal with their children in a manner completely different than the methods you're using. So they don't respond to your ways. Number nine, the teacher may not like the student. And this is true. As a teacher, you may not like the student. You're going to have students that are going to push your button. And the student recognizes it, and they're going to be combative and angry. And then the last one, failure in other subjects just might carry over into PE. So let's go on. How are we going to deliver effective feedback? Feedback. When you deliver negative and corrective feedback, you want to do it in a private manner, directly to that particular student, and not in front of anybody else to where they would be embarrassed. Not all students should be punished for the behavior of a few misbehaving classmates. Please try and stay away from that. How do we avoid feedback that offers the possibility of backlash? Some types of feedback may work immediately, where the behavior is going to stop. But down the road, they're going to cause greater problems for the long haul. So we want to avoid these that are listed here. Preaching and moralizing. Preaching to the students. They're going to make mistakes. They are young. They are still learning. Please do not say, you should know better than that. If you're not having a bad day, and we're going to do it. You're going to do it. I did it, but just try and stay away from it. Threatening. Threats are ultimatums that attempt you to terminate an unacceptable behavior, even though you know the threat is impossible to carry out. For example, if you do not stop that, I'm going to kick you out of class. Whatever you say, you have to follow through with it. So don't say it. Don't threaten the student. Ordering and commanding. If you are bossy, the students begin to think you are nothing more than a pawn to be moved around the area. Be courteous, be polite. Interrogating. When a problem arises, like if there's a fight, your initial reaction might be to try and figure out who started it. But very little is gained by trying to learn who started it. Refusing to listen. These are things that you do not want to do, all of these, okay? Refusing to listen by telling the student, let's talk about it some other time. This response might be necessary to keep the students focused, but if you always refuse to listen, they won't interact with you anymore. And the last one you do not want to do, labeling. Telling them, stop acting like a baby, or you're behaving like a bunch of first graders. Stay away from labeling. Teachers sometimes think that labeling will improve the performance, but it's really destructive and leaves the students with negative feelings instead. So you want to stay away from these. And again, even though these are not on the test, these are so important for you to learn in order for you to be an effective teacher. Part 2 has 5 sections. And these are the 5 sections that I'm going to go into in great detail. But what you need to realize is effectively managing the class is dependent on your ability to clearly articulate your expectations without guidelines, without routines. The students have to guess what you expect every day. So you want routines, the same routines. Section 1, under Part 2 about your classroom procedures, rules, and consequences, talks about the 7 different types of routines that you want to have. For instance, how are the students supposed to enter the teaching area? Whether it's PE, whether it's the classroom, how are they supposed to enter the teaching area? Have some type of routine. The second routine, the teaching area is defined. Well, that doesn't happen, that's not necessarily in the classroom, but for PE it is. Like it's understood that we are on one half of the gym court. What is the area that if you're teaching outside, you have to know, they have to know the boundaries. Number 3, where and how they should meet. Are they going to be in squads? Do they have a certain spot? Is it a semicircle? Is it scattered? How are they supposed to meet? Number 4, what signal are you going to use to freeze the class? Hands on knees? Hands on head? What are you going to do to freeze the class? Blow the whistle twice? Be consistent. Number 6, how do they procure and put away the equipment? So how do you have them get the equipment? How are you going to have them do that? And how are you going to have them put it away? In your self-evaluation that you have to do after you teach your lesson, these are some of the things I ask in that self-evaluation, because these are some of the things that aren't going to be listed in the lesson, but it's important for you to have some routines or have some structure, and how are you going to manage your class? And then number 7, how they will be grouped for instruction. 2 groups, 4 groups, groups of 3, groups of 4. How are they going to be grouped? Section 2 talks about creating your rules and your procedures. Rules are expected. They are a part of a school. You have to have rules. Your school administrators, they typically judge you on how effective you are by how well you manage the students, rather than how much you know the subject matter. That's how important it is for you to know how to manage your students. And I firmly believe in this statement that's in the book. If you cannot manage students, you cannot teach them. So when you're creating your rules, you want to select general categories rather than specific behaviors. The next slide is going to be an example of that. So what are some rules I want you to know that's going to help guide you to design your own rules? The first one, so as I already said, select major categories of behavior rather than a multitude of specific behaviors. Like we're going to have respect yourself and others as one of them. That's a broad category, but that's okay. You're going to talk about specifics when you're explaining it to the student. The second one, identify observable behavior. Make it easy to determine whether the student is following a rule if you don't have subjective judgment. For instance, do your best might be an example. Another suggestion when designing rules, make your rules reasonable for the age level of your students. How old are these students? You want to limit the number of your rules. 3 to 5 is a good number. Too many, and the students, it's going to get lost. The fifth, state your rules briefly and in a positive manner. Writing the rules that covers all situations is impossible. It's impossible. So make your rule brief, but yet broad. I have found when something comes up during the school year and you realize, okay, this is wrong, I got to address it. You can't punish the student, or you can't, like if you take points, like I used to get participation grade. And because I was told I could do that. So if I give you 100 points, I can take away points. But if you don't have an example of, let's say, chewing gum, and now you want to add that to it, you can say, okay, starting tomorrow, if a student is chewing gum, I'm taking off 2 points. But you didn't have it or you didn't talk about it before, so you can't do it today, but you can tell them starting tomorrow. And you can change it that way. So here's a little example of some classroom rules for PE. Number 1, freeze, look, and listen. This tells you stop what you're doing, look at the teacher, and listen to what she has to say. Number 2, respect yourself and others. Remember we said we want to have major categories rather than a multitude of specific ones. Okay? Personal space, this would be lower elementary. And maybe you could do upper elementary. But with that, keep your hands, feet, and unkind words to yourself. I like the unkind words part. Encourage others. And then hustle and say, I can, or I'll try. I like that. And notice the rules are basically 3. You have 3 examples within number 2, but you're still stating them briefly and in a positive manner. When you are defining your classroom procedures, rules, you also have to develop consequences for rule breaking. When the rules are broken, the students have to learn. You have to teach them that they have to accept the consequences of their misbehavior. The sooner we teach our students or our children, our own children or nieces or nephews, that there are consequences, hopefully minor consequences, but there are consequences for misbehavior, the better off that child or student is going to be. So you're going to post the consequences for what's considered unacceptable behavior. You're going to discuss the rules and consequences with your students, with your class, to make sure they understand your guidelines. And then you're going to have the students agree upon the rules and consequences and to ensure that they're going to buy in on it. Okay? One of the best ways to earn the students' respect is to treat them all in a fair and caring way. Animosity occurs when the students sense that you play favorites. So you want to beware of favoring certain students. You may not mean to, but you will, until you have to catch yourself. You want to be consistent. That is the number one problem that you are going to have. I had it. You're going to have it. Every teacher has it. To be consistent with your rules, especially when it gets to February or March of the school year. You know, in the fall, you have different holidays, Labor Day holiday, Thanksgiving, Christmas. You come back from the Christmas holidays, depending on how long before you have Mardi Gras. I don't know what it is, but in March they start misbehaving, and you find yourself in a pickle too. You have to be consistent with your rules, and that's going to be your hardest part. And you have to deliver your consequences equitably, meaning if they choose to break a rule, apply the consequence without judging him or her, judging their character, or making any type of derogatory statement about him or her. It's the misbehavior that triggered the consequences, and you need to explain that to the student. It doesn't mean they're a bad student. It's the choice they made, the behavior they chose to exhibit. And again, this is such an important part of teaching. I know I don't have a test question on it, but I sure hope you're paying close attention to it, because you're going to need it when it's time to start teaching. Another consideration that you may want to take is to share your rules with parents and administrators. When you're designing your classroom procedures, your classroom rules, your classroom consequences, share them. It takes a village to raise a child. So at the beginning of the school year, send out a newsletter or send out a form to them, sharing and explaining your discipline plan for your students and their consequences. Share your rules with your administrators to help them to clarify your expectations, especially if you were to happen to be a PE teacher and not just a classroom teacher, or if you do take your kids out, what are your expectations for them, whether it's PE or the classroom? And finally, you want to have the class practice your rules. We know rules stipulate expected class behavior, so give them the opportunity to practice. For instance, how do you want the equipment handled? You practice with them. Practice at the beginning of the school year is huge, naturally, but remaining consistent with your expectations throughout the school year might be your challenge, and you have to notice all of the students all of the time. So you want to avoid phrases that imply that the student is incapable of meeting your expectations. For instance, how many times do I have to tell you not to do that? Please don't say that. Please don't say that. Change your way of thinking. Reframe your thoughts. So this concludes part 1 and part 2. Let's go on to part 3 of this chapter. Part 3 of this chapter, incorporating efficient management skills. In order to be able to move and organize the students and to get them to do it quickly and efficiently, you have to have techniques, you have to have routines, and the students must accept them. So we need to teach class management skills just like we teach physical skills. And they're going to do this through practice and repetition until it becomes second nature. So when we deliver instructions, in order to deliver them efficiently, if they're not listening when you're giving instructions, there's little learning going to occur. You know that I want you to not speak or talk as a teacher if students in the class are talking. Now, are you going to have to get their attention some type of way? Give me 5, hands on knees. Give me a double high five. I'll blow this whistle twice. Hands on head, something to get them to stop talking. Do it. We want to deliver our instructions in small doses, focusing on just one or two key points at a time. So, our instructions should only be about 20 to 30 seconds long, and then we're going to alternate that with periods of activity. We will give them some input, we'll allow them to practice, and then we'll provide feedback. So when we minimize the amount of content per instruction, it helps to eliminate frustration, and it allows them to focus on whatever goal you want them to focus on. Here in Chapter 7 is whenever they talk about when before what. I know I've been saying this since the beginning of the class, the first week, but you can see why I didn't wait until now for you to start implementing it, because I feel like it's too late in the semester. And that's why I wanted you to do that from the very get-go. So, I want you to know when before what. When giving instructions, you want to be specific. For instance, when I say go, I'd like you to scoop up the ball with your dominant hand and toss it to your neighbor, toss it to your partner, and the partner catches it in the dominant hand. And then you say the word go. Be specific about what follows the word what. Be specific, and don't say, when I say go, you begin. No. Be specific. Also, to stop and start the class consistently. How are we going to do this? This is a very basic and important management skill. You can use something audio or like a voice command, but for me, you can't use the word stop. But whatever you choose, you need to make sure it's 100% compliance when you ask the students to stop. If not, you might have to do the rule of 3 and have them practice it, right? So, a whistle, a visual signal, doing both of these is very effective, because some children may not hear the whistle for whatever reason because they're so involved in the activity they're doing. But what I do want you to know is you do not use a variety of signals to start the class and to stop the class. For me, you blow the squistle once to start if you choose to use the squistle. You blow the squistle twice to stop if you want to use the squistle. Be consistent and keep the same signal throughout the whole year. The whole year. Some more ways to efficiently manage your class. What are some skills you need to consider? You want to be able to move your students into groups or formations quickly. I repeat, quickly. And you can do simple techniques to match them up. For instance, the friendship spots that they're talking about here might be poly spots laid out in an area, and they find a poly spot. Finding partners, I want you to know the activity toe-to-toe or elbow-to-elbow or shoulder-to-shoulder, which is very similar to my whistle mixer, but they just call it toe-to-toe, where you don't have them skip or hop and you don't blow the squistle amount of times. You just say toe-to-toe. So what's important is they find a partner as fast as possible and do not allow them to look for their favorite friend or refuse to be someone's partner who's right next to them. They have to quickly find the nearest person, toe-to-toe. You can say, if they don't want to do toe-to-toe, elbow-to-elbow, shoulder-to-shoulder, whatever. Okay? But it's basically the same thing. Finding a partner real quick. Someone's right there close to you. I also want you to know to divide the class in half into 2 equal groups. This toe-to-toe with a partner works well also. Whistle mixer works well. Toe-to-toe is even faster than whistle mixer. For developmental level 1 students, have one partner sit down while the other one remains standing. I do this even for developmental level 2 or 3 as well. But if one partner sits down, then the other one that's standing, they're going to go to the area and do whatever you want them to do. Form a circle, get in a line behind such and such cone, whatever it may be. Then you have the one sitting go do what they need to do. And you have two equal groups, assuming you have an equal number in your class. For developmental levels 2 and 3, you can have the partner raise a hand and keep their hand raised until they get over there, and make sure you have the two equal groups. I want you to know to create small groups, more than just 2 people, or if you want to create groups of 3, 4, 5, or whatever. We know about whistle mixer. I've been requiring you to do whistle mixer since day 1. So whistle mixer skip, blow the whistle X amount of times, 4 times if that's what you want. Also hold up 4 fingers. If there are any extras, then you decide where they go. Creating circles or single file lines, I want you to know an effective technique for moving them into a line or a circle is to do what we call fall in. They can be running randomly in the area until you give some type of signal for them to fall in. They're going to continue jogging if that's what they're doing, and they move toward the perimeter of the area. They're around the area. You didn't think you were going to have math terms in PE, did you? But the perimeter of the area, and they fall in line behind someone, and they keep running until everybody's in the circle. Another method of moving the class into formation is to ask students to get in various formations without talking. Use visual signals, but they cannot ask someone verbally to move. Then we have squads. Squads can expedite your class organization. Squads or groups should be selected so that a child might not be chosen last, which is very embarrassing. Make sure the way you choose the squads or whatnot, you don't do it in that type of manner where 2 students get to pick. You know, a lot of times it's done to choose teams. The only time if ever I did it, I would know those 2 students that were probably going to be the last ones picked because they're not very athletically inclined, and let them be the captain. They're not going to be the last one picked. Number 2, designate a location for assembling students in their squad formation. Are you going to have poly spots on the floor to show where they should be, or cones, or what are you going to have? Number 3, use squad leaders so that students have an opportunity to learn leadership. The way I did my fitness, you had your 5 in the front, let's say, and then you have 4 or 5 people lined up behind them. So those 5 for this week would lead. Next week, they move to the end of the line, and a new group of 5 come up. That way, it gives everybody an opportunity to learn and to be leaders. Because those who are leaders that are in the squad, they have to learn to be quiet. Because they have such a tendency to lead that they don't know how to be quiet. So not only is the leader learning how to be a leader, those that are in the squads, that are in the line, they have to learn to be quiet and let the leaders be leaders. Number 4, composition of squads can be predetermined. That's so true. Like for my fitness, I would line them up alphabetical order so I could take roll, because I was teaching PE all day. And so I had 6 people per row, 1 for every week of the 6 weeks, and everybody took a turn. Number 5, an even number of squads should be formed so that the class can be broken quickly into halves for games. Let's say you have 6 lines. 3 lines can go for this team, 3 lines, the other 3 lines can go for the other team. It works well to have an even number of squads. Number 6, another method is to distribute task cards to specify how the squads are arranged. Okay, you might have home base, place a bunch of poly spots on the floor throughout the area, and then when you say home base, they get to one of them if you have a small number in your class. Then on page 136, they talk about knowing the student's name. If you were going to have to go teach at the elementary school, how were you going to know their names? You don't know them. How were you going to learn their names? One approach as a teacher, because you're going to have this issue when you get your students. You're not going to know their names either at the start of the school year. So how are you going to learn their names? One suggestion is to memorize 3 or 4 names per class period. Okay? I like seating charts. And I would have their names in that seating chart, and I would say their names or look at the seating chart, and that would help me to know who they were, to help me to remember. And the seating chart I would give to my sub so they would know where the students are supposed to be sitting as well. You can tell the students that you're trying to learn their names and ask them to say their name before they're performing a skill or when you come up to them and talk to them. The book also suggests to take pictures. I don't know about that. If you keep it to yourself, maybe you could, but take pictures of the students and that'll help you to identify. I personally like the seating chart for in the classroom. And naturally you wouldn't have that in the gym, but in the classroom it worked well. You want to establish pre-teaching routines and post-teaching routines. Effective teaching demands routines, we know that, and the handling of certain procedures. So here are some thoughts that you need to consider. Non-participation for PE. What if a student says, my tummy hurts, and they cannot participate today? What are you going to do? If you're the classroom teacher and you're bringing them out to PE, you can't really tell them they're a liar, that's for sure. You have to accept the information at face value, avoid questioning the student. My philosophy was, if we're having a lot of fun, that student's going to quickly, their tummy ache's going to go away and they're going to feel better. That's what I've experienced. So screening those who can't participate, hopefully you have a nurse there that can tell you who cannot participate. But if you're having fun, if the kids are enjoying what you're doing in PE, they're going to want to play, if at all possible, and if they should play. We've already talked about entering the teaching area. You want to explain to them how they should enter the area and what they're supposed to do. Starting the lesson, they're going to want to move. And that's why I believe in the introductory activity as the first component. They have been sitting in the classroom. They want to move. So they're going to be more willing to listen after they participated in a short, vigorous activity that only lasted about 2 minutes. They're tired. Get them tired. That's what you want to do. Closing the lesson. You want a regular routine for closing the lesson. This is an opportunity for you to conclude any type of instructional content that you gave the students, and it also has a procedure for them leaving the area. And it also gets them calm and quiet so that when they do go to the classroom. As far as for equipment procedures, you want to teach them how you want them to get the equipment and how you want them to return it at the end of the lesson. So I want you to know this is where the book talks about placing the equipment around the perimeter. Like if you form a big circle with the equipment. And therefore the students have easy access by going away from the center. You do not want to place it in a box or in a pile in the center. That's a huge no-no. A huge no-no. Passing time for discussing student behavior issues. You're going to have students who misbehave during class, but that needs to be talked to after class if possible. Can you talk to the student while walking back to the classroom and watch the class? It may not be possible. So that's where you're going to have to figure out how you're going to handle that misbehavior right there while it's happening, but still watching the rest of the class and do it in a private manner? Or do you have a few minutes where you might be able to talk to them later? What are some thoughts about using equipment effectively? If you have little small pieces of equipment like little bitty balls or hoops or jump ropes, make sure you have enough for every student to have one. If it's larger pieces of equipment, then you may have to put them in stations or groups in order for, at one ball per group of 5, 6 people. And that works well. There's nothing wrong with that. You definitely want to teach the students where to place the equipment during instruction. Here is where the book talks about home position. When you want the class to pay attention to you, the bean bags, they can just place them on the floor. The basketballs, maybe between your feet. The jump ropes, they could be placed on the floor as well. But it keeps the students from playing with equipment while you are teaching them or giving them instructions, and let them be focused on what you're saying. When you distribute the equipment, you want to distribute it as quickly as possible. When they have to wait in line for a piece of equipment, time's wasted, and you are almost for sure going to have behavior problems. The students are going to misbehave. They cutting up. They have a lot more energy than us. A better and faster method, we know, to have the equipment placed around the perimeter. And then the reverse procedure to put the equipment away is also good. Any method beats the practice of placing that equipment in the middle of the area in a box or a container or whatnot. That's a huge no-no where you're asking for trouble. So no matter how the students acquire the equipment, you want to clearly explain what to do with the equipment after they get it. Do not make them, those students who have hustled, don't make them suffer for those who are lagging behind. Let those students play with it. Reward them. Let them practice or show me what you can do. I like that saying. That's a free exploration type of teaching method, but it's a short time. It's only going to be about 15, 30 seconds maybe while everybody's getting the equipment. But that will want them to get the equipment faster if you, depending on what method you use for them to get the equipment. Let them play with it until you are ready to start teaching or giving your instructions, and then you're going to blow the whistle twice.